Get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Robert Wickham, and it's my pleasure to host this panel here today. This is an important topic, and judging by the attendance that we have, we recognize that it's something that's rattling around in the minds of everyone here today. We certainly live in interesting times. On the one hand, we are accelerating to a world very exciting where technology is all around us. The World Economic Forum refers to it as the fourth industrial revolution. On the other hand, we're facing into some challenges. There's a lot being written, discussed, debated around the trust crisis that exists at a global level, at a country level, and at a company level. And this is what we want to tackle here today from multiple perspectives. We've got a great panel for you. I'm excited to have them here. And let me start by introducing our panelists. To my immediate left, your right, is Stan Grant. Stan is the ABC's Global Affairs and Indigenous Affairs Analyst. He's one of Australia's most respected and awarded journalists with more than 30 years experience on television and current affairs. So welcome, Stan.
Thank you, thank you.
Next to Stan, we have Adrian McDermott, who's currently the CMO of Sea Folly, a well-known brand here in Australia. Adrian has over 25 years in experience inspiring positive change in others through products, experiences, and creative marketing. She's held various roles throughout Australia and the US, including places like Nike, David Jones, Diego Camilla, and Banana Republic. Welcome, Adrian. And then Rick Stanton. In 2018, Rick played a leading role in the rescue of the soccer team in Thailand from the caves. He and his diving partner, John Volanthen, were the first to make contact with the team and played a leading role in the successful rescue thereafter. Please join me in welcoming the panel. So I want to start by, and I should say that we're going to run for the next 30 minutes or so, and there will be no Q&A, so we're just going to go through a conversation here and try to unpack as much as we can, trying to understand where we are, but more importantly, how do we navigate to clearer waters? What is a path forward that everyone can leave here today with some actionable things that they can do in their respective companies and their respective lives? So let's start by thinking about what does trust mean in each of your respective context today. Stan from media, Adrian from brands, Rick from a high pressure, high stakes environment. Stan, why don't you kick us off?
Trust is essential to media. Our business is built on credibility and believability. If people don't believe what we tell them, then we have no business. We have no business model. And that's been a huge challenge for the media, particularly, say, in the last decade. I think the proliferation of social media has eroded the business model of traditional forms of media, and people know how it's done. I think people can see behind the scenes now. They can see where the connections are. And I think that's a real challenge. You know, anybody technically can be a journalist. You can go out and you can have your mobile phone, you can take an image of something, you can write a blog, you can do the work of a journalist. What's left for us? What's left for us is our expertise, our experience, our credibility, and our believability. And this is a huge problem because that trust in those things is most definitely eroding. And I think part of the reason that that is eroding is the reaction to the shift in the business model. As the traditional forms of media have been more challenged just to make money, just to stay alive, we've seen more journalists being laid off, we've seen concentration of media ownership, and we've seen much more partisanship in our media. If you look at the United States, for example, you know what Fox News is going to say. You know what MSNBC is going to say. You know the line that CNN's going to take. If you look in Australia, we have News Limited that has a very particular line. You see the ABC, which is often accused of being more progressive or more left-leaning. But people are becoming increasingly tribalized. They're seeking out the media that speaks to their tribe, and that is then fed into the business model of the media. That the media is playing to a lot of those biases, to a lot of that tribalism. And that ultimately erodes the credibility and believability of the industry. So this is a really challenging time for the media, a challenging time to reinvent itself, to change the business model, and to stop the erosion of that credibility and believability, which is at the core of the industry.
So I'm hearing from you that in your world, trust in the media is about credibility and believability. Adrian, what does it mean from a brand perspective?
From my experience, which has been a career of building brands, it's not too dissimilar. The difference between good brands and great brands comes down to believability and trust. And I would really put it into one word, which would be authenticity. And authenticity is believing in something, even if it makes a sacrifice of something else. It's a decisiveness. And great brands have that, and good brands don't. It also applies to people and leadership in the business context. I know I myself made a really hard decision about 8 years ago when I was working in the States for Nike, and I had a choice of continuing my career there or moving my husband and 3 children back to Australia. And I had to look quite deeply in terms of my own authenticity for the kind of life that I wanted beyond work. And in that case, it was moving back to Australia. And I have gratitude every day that I made that decision. I wouldn't otherwise be up on this stage with these inspiring people, for example. But it's those kinds of decisions that brands make and people make, which really, garner trust in others.
Trust, credibility, and authenticity. Stan, your view? Rick, sorry.
So I operate underwater, which is a non-human environment, non-breathable, no daylight, all artificial light, and so quite an extreme alien environment. And we do that for pleasure. And when we're not doing it for pleasure, it's normally a high-profile, highly stressful incident with a lot of people looking at us. So we're really trusting individuals, close ties, close contact, people that you can trust to make highly critical decisions, often life-critical decisions under stress. A lot of people can make decisions, but making decisions with a lot of pressure and expectations upon you is the thing we're looking for.
Yeah, and that's fascinating, right? Because many of us have the ability to work with people for a long period of time and build trust over an extended period. But in your particular scenario, the one in the cave rescue, you're parachuted in there, stakes are high, you've got to make a call in that moment, who you're going to trust, who you're not going to trust. Talk us through how you went through that analysis.
Well, when I was parachuted in, to use your expression, I was with my diving partner, John, so obviously we have a very tight bond and relationship in diving. But then it's about really trusting your instincts. There's, especially when we were working with other divers on the scene. So there is a bit of a cliche regarding astronauts, the right stuff. And if you were to write a paper, words, what the right stuff was, it'd be pretty hard to define. Yet it's very easy to identify. And so to do that, you are using your instincts. So it's quite clear who was. My mic's gone, has it? So it's quite. We were quite clear at using instincts to even in selecting the team. For example, by a strange coincidence, I actually know 3 cave diving anaesthetists, and that using an anaesthetist was clearly highly instrumental in the whole plan. And I used my instinct to realise that Dr. Richard Harris, recently Australian of the Year, along with his partner Craig, dive partner Craig, instinctively I knew that he had the right stuff to be able to, and the qualities involved, to really put his career on the line and be able to do the dive and understand what was needed. Because that was a big ask of somebody.
Can I say, it's very similar in journalism. We get to work in very high-pressured, high-stressed environments. When I worked for CNN for more than a decade, part of my job was to cover conflict zones. So I did the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, terrorist attacks across the Middle East, across South Asia, a lot of time in Pakistan. And these are environments where your life is on the line. And the person you're working with, you have to trust beyond any measure. Your life is in the other person's hand. And there were only certain people that I would go into those situations with. People that I knew, people that I had experienced that with. And again, instinctively, people that you knew that not only you could work with, but you could spend a lot of time with, and that you could wind down with, and you could share things with. You know, you'd walk into a terrorist bombing or a conflict scene, and you don't have time to talk about things. You don't have time to make assessments. You have to go to work. You have to know exactly what you're doing. I have to know that the cameraman is shooting what I want him to shoot. He has to know that I've got his back, because if he's looking down the lens, he can't see what's behind him. And at any moment, there could be a stray bullet. You could be kidnapped. There could be a roadside bomb. You know, these situations demand absolute trust, more than, you know, your life depends on your ability to trust that person.
And
Adrian, you look like...
And that trust is built up through experience with those people, time served with them.
Adrian, you look like you wanted to jump in on that.
I was just wondering whether or not my day-to-day is a life and death situation. But what I was thinking about is, you know, in reading up about this topic in that Edelman Trust Index, what was really interesting about this year's release is that about 10 years ago, trust was about the top down, then it was about peer-to-peer, and the really big insight from this year's index is that it's more about local.
Yep, and can I just stop you there?
And that's a very interesting...
For those of us that are not familiar, the Edelman Trust Index is an annual survey of countries around the world across the 4 major institutions: NGOs, government, media, and business.
Yes.
Right? And here in Australia, those institutions have been in steady decline. That's what the Edelman Trust Index has been showing. Please go ahead.
But just to further that point, that really what people trust the most now is what's most local to them, what they're most familiar with, what's within that very close proximity. It's the relationships between people that are so important. And when it applies to business, the other insight is that people actually have more trust in the only institution that they can influence, which is their own employer, because they are making an impact within their own institution. The more local impact that they can make to, you know, influence change. You look at Salesforce, you know, making stands around equality, for example. People within businesses are demanding more from those institutions because they're closest to them to be able to really take leadership in instilling and restoring trust.
So we've established that trust is a combination, a mashup of credibility, authenticity, experience, close-knit relationships. So are we in a crisis? Is it hyperbolic to say that we're in a crisis? If so, why do we think we are in a crisis? And more importantly, what do we think has gotten us to this point?
I think we're absolutely in a crisis. You know, there's a line from Antonio Gramsci, the great sociologist, who said, "The old is dead and the new is yet to be born." And I think that's exactly where we are in the world right now. You know, I think the world is analogous to the world of 1913. If you go back to 1913, you have a rising power in Germany and a waning great power in Great Britain. You have technological expansion, you have global trade. They were talking about globalization, in 1913. And they were saying then that the worst could not happen. We could not go to war. England and Germany were each other's biggest trading partners. The Kaiser and the King were cousins. And within a year, the world was tipped into global conflict. 1914, 1918, you emerge out of that conflict into the 1920s and you slide into the Great Depression. Out of the Great Depression, you have the rise of fascism across Europe. Out of that, you have World War II. At the end of World War II, the world that we knew took shape. You have the United Nations Security Council, the Bretton Woods Agreement with the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the creation of the World Trade Organization. All of the instruments of global order that have secured the peace since the end of World War II emerged out of that period of rapid upheaval from 1914 through to 1940. And now we are seeing the same thing again. Rising China challenging a waning power in the United States. Really interesting that you pointed to localism as where trust lies. That's a two-edged sword. Localism can also mean I don't trust the outsider. I don't trust the other. Why are we seeing borders going back up again across Europe? Why are we seeing a rejection of refugees? Why are we seeing people retreating into their tribes, into their religions, their races, their ethnicity? Why are we seeing an increase of identity and the politics of identity? You know, I think this is an absolutely critical time in the world, and technology feeds directly into this. If it was technology that created the modern world, if it was technology that gave rise to the printing press, the Industrial Revolution, that gave us the weapons of war, that saw the greatest slaughter of humanity ever during the 20th century, we are seeing technology now changing the nature of warfare, drones, the rise of robot soldiers, artificial intelligence, technology eroding trust in traditional forms of media, technology undermining business models, shops are shutting down because we can buy something online cheaper from overseas, technology that doesn't observe borders and nationalities but is transnational. Technology is feeding into this crisis and we don't know where this is going to end up.
So at the macro level, what I'm hearing you saying is that the structures that led to post-World War II prosperity are under threat. Adrian, at a company level, what are you seeing?
At a company level, I think the biggest threat to the trust crisis is the fact that we do operate in a global competitive world. And again, it's not as altruistic as Stan has shared. However, I think in the context of those of you who are here today and who have the ability to really address the trust crisis that occurs in Australia within your own brands, there is a gap between Australia and the rest of the world. I know, and from my own firsthand experience, I've spent half my life living in the US and half my life living in Australia. A lot of the examples we've heard today, if you think about it, in America, Americans are a lot more willing to give their trust to brands if they deliver to them personalization, customer experience, and value and loyalty. If you look up the most trusted brands in the US, they're brands like Amazon, they're brands like Marriott, which was mentioned today, they're brands like Southwest Airlines that communicate to people on a personalized basis and deliver a superior form of customer service. It's unfortunate, but in Australia, the most trusted brands are actually those that deliver value for money and no-frills service. If you look up the Roy Morgan Trust Index, they are Aldi, Kmart, they're the ABC as well, which is good, but they're Aldi, Kmart, Bunnings. There is only one brand in the top 10 which delivers superior customer service, and that's Qantas. So what that means is there's a huge gap competitively in the world between Australians and consumers and the brands here fostering and garnering trust from their consumers and what's happening elsewhere. And that's exactly the context of why we're here. And it's not just because I drank the Kool-Aid today, like you did, hearing all these wonderful stories, but that's the fact. And I think that that's the crisis that's been driven by demand in the world and where we are in catch-up mode. And we have a responsibility as leaders of those brands to to actually catch up and
But
deliver.
what's interesting though is that we see examples when there's a clear purpose, you can short circuit that crisis and rally people and build trust. Would you see it that way, Rick, or
Largely, when we arrived, there was total confusion, and some people had lost the concept of what they were there for. But after a few days, yes, everyone was pulling together. When certain people were taken off site, then the whole rescue force was all directed to one common purpose. International borders were irrelevant. Language barriers were overcome. Cultural barriers were overcome. Close and open concepts of dealing with each people,
But-
all overcome.
but do you think that purpose played a role
Absolutely, yeah.
in sort of hacking that trust?
Yeah,
or
it
short-circuiting
cut
that?
right through everything. Absolutely.
And to what extent then, Adrian, do you see from a company level?
That's purpose is the answer, and that's why, to me, it goes back to again that authenticity. And I would define authenticity in two ways in terms of restoring trust. One is more explicit. One is the craftsmanship, the quality of product itself, the quality of service, the external nature of what you're selling, just making sure it's the top thing in the world. That's the explicit authenticity. But what's more interesting in the trust argument is around the implicit authenticity, which is the purpose and the alignment of a company's genuine values, their alignment to their people, their alignment to a social good, and doing the right thing is even more critical today. And it's the alignment of both that explicit and implicit authenticity that consumers will really respond to, that really breeds trust.
So can you talk a little bit about your experience at Nike then?
Yeah.
Because I think everyone has seen Nike's campaign, and more
Yeah.
importantly, has seen the evolution of Nike's campaign. So
Yeah.
if you go back to when they would put athletes on a pedestal,
Yeah.
and oftentimes there's a disconnect between the athlete that they're projecting and the real person,
Yeah.
comes back to authenticity that we talked
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
Talk us through some
Yeah,
of the
it's
decisions there
really-
and what we might learn from that.
It's really interesting, and those of you who may be following what Nike's doing, it's very deliberate and it's very smart. So over the past year or so, they've really reverted their brand positioning and advertising towards a dream crazy kind of platform. And even last week, they launched a campaign around even crazier that addressed gender issues in sport. It's a very deliberate strategy. Again, making decisive decisions around one's authenticity is absolutely core to what Nike does, and it's what breeds and garners that conversation and also the trust. When they do something, people listen. It's no coincidence that they've started to really resonate with real people and real issues. They're addressing obesity, age, gender, disability. They're supporting athletes like Kaepernick, who took a stand against police brutality by backing him, even though it's controversial. It's a very deliberate strategy. But you'll notice in some of their advertising, they've still got Serena Williams in there. So they've still got the investment in the athletes. And what they're trying to do is make it possible for normal people, everyday real people, to get closer to those heroes. And they've done it brilliantly. And I think it's a very deliberate strategy to garner trust and to really resonate and be more relatable to people today.
So what does that mean for the average business in terms of how they might apply that?
How you might learn from that, it's all about being real. And I actually missed Celeste Barber's talk. Did a lot of people see Celeste Barber earlier? I really wanted to see her, but she is a fantastic example of someone who's just keeping it real, not taking it too seriously. And it's interesting because a lot of brands use influencer strategies, ourselves included. And the influencer marketing nowadays is going towards Celeste Barber, which is, I am just like you, not be just like me. And there's a really big difference between those two strategies, and it's working well for brands to really, again, just
How does
market
that
that
resonate in your
authenticity.
world, Stan?
It worries me, to be honest, because I think just like localism, authenticity and being real can be very dangerous things.
How
I think,
so?
well, Donald Trump says, I'm just like you, not be like me. Donald Trump said, make America great again. He was saying
but
that
that's not
he
authentic,
spoke-
though.
Oh, it's very authentic.
Because
it's
he's not like everyone.
absolutely
It's
no, but
authentic to him.
he has sold them on the idea
Yeah.
that he is the voice of the real people of America. So populism, which is the scourge of global politics, every populist leader says there are the real people and there are the non-people. Donald Trump says, I'm for the real people. I'm going to drain the swamp. I'm going to throw out the Washington elite. These people don't care about you. This guy is, you know, he's a New York billionaire property developer. He is not like them, but he has sold them on the idea that he is authentic and he is real. In Australia, who is the most authentic politician? It's probably Pauline Hanson, who says, I speak like you, I understand you, I am just like you. No, she's not, but she sells them on the idea. And sometimes authenticity and realness can play to our worst instincts. And the most successful popular leaders in the world today are the ones who play to fear, anxiety, and this idea that there is an authentic, real people, and everybody else who is not that.
Yeah, but I'm gonna
non-real
push you on
people.
that, because there's a nuance in what you're saying. Because what I heard Adrian say is you have to be your authentic sense, and I'm sure Rick would agree with that as well.
Absolutely.
And what you're saying is within a political context, there are times when you will pander.
All the time.
You will pander, but that's
All
not
the
being
time.
authentic.
No, but it is selling authenticity. And that's what businesses are doing.
But I think that
They're
contributes
selling
to
authenticity.
the
No
prices.
one really believes that Nike is on your side. No one. Nike is not supporting Colin Kaepernick because they support Colin Kaepernick. If we believe that, we believe in Make America Great Again. They're selling authenticity.
Now you've just put me into Trump support.
No,
and I'm not a Trump
I'm
supporter,
not. But I'm saying understand that there is selling authenticity and selling what is real,
Yep.
and then there is what is real.
Yep.
And my hackles go up when I hear that, because
yeah.
I've spent a lifetime reporting on places where the people who say they are authentic and say they are real are the most dangerous people possible to know.
So I'll take that. Let me put this to you then. How does your industry, media, go about restoring the trust that it currently faces,
Well,
the deficit that it currently faces?
It's a funny thing, the media, because it's really not a traditional business in that sense. I mean, Fox News sells itself on being the voice of the people. You know, they actually advertise themselves as being fair and balanced. Not at all. They're not fair and balanced at all. But they sell themselves on that idea of being fair and balanced. The marketing of journalism inevitably gets in the way of the credibility of journalism. You know, when Channel 9 or Channel 7 choose what's going to be in their news each night, the most important thing in the world will not be the most important story on that news that night. Absolutely not. When Venezuela was going to hell, last week India and Pakistan, two nuclear-armed states, were on the verge of going to what would be their fifth war in the last century. And what would have been leading on Channel 9 or Channel 7 News? Some footballer who's got a porn video that's being shared amongst other players, or some car accident somewhere. They are telling you what is most important in the world. They're saying, this is what matters to you. We're the voice of you. But they're not. It's a business model. And I think that's why the ABC still has overwhelming credibility and trust amongst most people, because it doesn't take a commercial decision in its editorial policies. It is genuinely trying to tell you, this is what you need to know. So business and journalism are very uneasy bedfellows, although at the same time, journalism can't exist without a business model. So, you know, that's the conundrum that journalism faces.
Rick, what's your view?
Well, I've obviously had a lot of dealings with the press in recent times. So we actually got known as the stony-faced Brits because we wouldn't converse with the press. And from my previous dealings for my career, if you gave a journalist 5 bullet point sentences of facts, that would get reported. Obviously, that's quite boring, so it will get reported as a story, making inferences and making a story which isn't necessarily true. And that's where we felt we didn't really want to talk to the press at that time. So I feel it's very hard.
Yeah.
And also, there was no real message, no genuine message coming from the press. Well, there was no press office in Thailand at the first, so anything we had said would have been speaking for the whole rescue at that time, which wasn't really our remit.
Yeah.
But just, and of course, you have no chance to proofread anything you tell a journalist, and that's the issue normally.
So let's tackle the other part of this question, which is where to from here? And I'd like to look at it from 3 levels. The first is at a macro level, which says as a country, as a society. The second is at a business level, at a company level. And the third is at an individual level, right? So how do we get ourselves into calmer waters from where we are right now in this turbulent part of the ocean? Adrian.
Maybe along the lines that Stan has encouraged us is be informed. It is everyone's responsibility on the macro level to be informed. And, you know, there's a lot of news sources out there. There's a lot of people saying a lot of things. There is so much proliferation of media and opportunity. Don't get your media from Facebook. Be informed. Stan and I
So
had
can you drill in on that a little bit? Because I would think most people think they are informed, but there's this well-documented phenomenon of confirmation bias.
Yes.
You're just hearing voices that amplify your own thoughts.
Well, the echo chamber that
So how
Stan spoke
how
about
would you
earlier.
give us some hacks about how you go about being properly informed?
Read the opinion pages. Know the other side of the argument. You know, go to credible news sources, obviously. And I'm going to say all these things. I know Stan's probably going to say the same. But you know, we all have a choice too, in the context of brands, of voting with our purchasing power. And in that sense, you know, transparency is easier than it ever has been to get to know what a brand stands for, everything that they do in terms of their supply chain. That transparency is being demanded. I think something like 70% of millennials want to know that about brands. That used to be the case only when it came to physical safety. Now it's involved in every category, including fashion. So, you know, do your homework, be informed, and there really is a big gap between those that are more informed are actually more trusting than those who are not informed. And I think as a responsibility on the macro level for us to lift that restoration of trust for the masses is a responsibility.
Rick, let me come to you next.
On a macro level.
Either on any of those 3.
Well, I think what Adrienne said about voting with your pocket, with your wallet, is very crucial, and voting politically responsibly is also critical, and that's how you can most influence things.
Stan?
You know, so there was a Greek goddess, Cassandra, who had the gift of prophecy and the curse of no one believing her. And I think that's sort of where we're at in the world today. There are a lot of people writing very informed things that tell us where the world is heading. You know, I spent 20 years reporting this shift in the world. And we are at an absolutely critical point. And sometimes it's better to just put your head in the sand and go and watch Married at First Sight or something, because you just don't want to walk around carrying that load. And what can we do about it? Can we stop China and America going to war? No, we can't. But there are things I think we can do, and there are certain values I think we need to ask ourselves. You know, I think all of us have benefited from what has been the greatest experiment in global history, and that is the experiment of liberal democracy, with the idea of freedom and free markets, the ability to trade with someone that you can't even speak the same language as, the ability to live next to someone who worships a different religion to you and not go to war. The idea that we can, you know, that we can share a country like Australia with people who are not like us, who are different. This is a very, very rare thing. And I think it's absolutely precious, and it's something that right now is under the greatest threat. People talk about a democratic recession. The Lowy Institute published a poll 2 years ago that revealed that a third of Australians under the age of 30 no longer even believed in democracy. We've had a royal commission into our churches. It's eroded trust and faith in our churches. We've had a royal commission into our financial institutions. That's eroded trust and faith in our institutions. We're still struggling to emerge from the global financial crisis. You know, the world is at a really critical point. But what can we do about it? You have to make a decision. What sort of world do you want to live in? It is not right that we live in a world where two average, hard-working Australians cannot buy a house in the city. That's not acceptable. It's not acceptable that we live in a world with the increasing inequality that we have. That is not acceptable. It's not acceptable that people run businesses that maximize profit over the welfare of their employees, that talk about being real, but actually are out there to make money at the expense of the people that they're actually selling the products to or employing. Just as Adrian said, you have to think about your product chain, where you're buying things from, who you're doing business with, what are the values of those people that you're doing business with. It's not good enough that we employ a whole generation of people now as permanent casuals with no security of employment, who can't get a home loan because they don't know whether they're going to have a job in 6 months or a year from now. You know, this is the society we create. Margaret Thatcher once said, you know, about neoliberalism, economics is the method. What we are doing is changing our soul. She also said there is no such thing as society, there is only individuals. Well, we have to decide, are we going to live in a society that is only individuals? Are we going to sell our souls to the market to maximize profit? Or are we genuinely, beyond what we can sell or who we can vote for, genuinely going to think about what sort of society we live in and how we get there?
So you're saying
You're
saying that we have agency collectively to create the future
in your
that
own
we want.
world. In your own world, just like Rick made decisions right there and then under extreme pressure to make decisions to save someone's life that cut across language boundaries, cultural boundaries, religious boundaries, national boundaries, and they got a job done. You can make decisions, you run businesses, you make decisions in your corporations, your businesses now about what values and what society you want. Then you create the society there that spills out into the wider society. But if we do nothing, we won't be living in the world that we enjoy now in 10 years. We will not. It's as plain as that.
So this is such an interesting topic that the time has accelerated away from us. We've got a couple minutes left, literally. I want to just turn to the panel for closing thoughts on this, in terms of what would you leave the group here with as we think about this, picking up on Stan's point that we are the agents of our own future at those three levels. What would be your final thoughts?
Maybe I'll jump in.
Sure.
So to me, again, it comes back to authenticity, and authenticity has to be a personal alignment first. I think that's a lot of the conclusion or the inspiration that's really come out of today. It starts with the individual. And then as brands and businesses, again, in the context of today's session, it's around being authentic to both the message and the messenger. And the closer you can align those two, authentically doing your research, being transparent, doing the right thing, the more authentic and the more trust will be gained. And I think the same principle applies to authenticity in leadership and even authentic happiness. So it's not easy, but the path there is a great win, really, if you can achieve it.
Rick?
What Adrienne said, but don't forget to trust your instincts in all of what you've mentioned. Because instinct plays a large part. You know where you want to go. You can probably identify it even if you couldn't write it down.
Stan, final word, 40 seconds.
Technology changed the world. The Industrial Revolution, the printing press, it gave us the modern world. Technology is going to change our world again. We have to decide whether we are slaves to technology or whether we are going to make that work for us. At the moment, technology is changing our business models, it's changing the way we relate to each other, it's changing the idea of personal privacy and freedom. It's changing our democracies. Are we going to let that define us, or are we going to make it work for us?
Please join me in thanking our panel. That brings us to the end of this session. I trust everyone had a very productive day here at Salesforce World Tour, and we wish you all the best as you journey home and back to your companies. Thank you, everyone.